in heaven, we want to thank you for gathering us here again this morning to hear words of wisdom and truth from heaven. We ask for a blessing. Please bless Brother Parminder that he will deliver truth to help us gain more knowledge and get ready for the sealing time. We thank you for all things in the name of Jesus. Amen.
I mentioned yesterday that we want to go through basically 4 timelines that we find in Daniel chapter 7, 8, 11 and 12, because this was the preliminary work that was done before we really need to go into Daniel 2. And I'm not sure if we're fully clear on the purpose for doing that. So I wanted to go through it just again and hopefully in the process tie up just reinforce some knowledge that you have, or tie up some misconceptions that you might have on some of those verses. So if you recall, last time Elder Jeff did this, some of the dating went all a bit skew. So hopefully I'll try and get it to a stage where it makes some kind of sense. So I'm going to do Daniel 7. Daniel 8. (11) and 12. So there's a lot of information on here, so I won't put all the information on, but we'll talk about the dates and hopefully tie up the verses. So Daniel 7, 8, 11 and 12. So you can turn in your notes. I can't remember the exact date that it was. It was whilst I was in Brazil. So it's coming up to 2 weeks, maybe a bit longer. So let's turn to Daniel 7. And actually, no, let's turn to, we'll do Daniel 11 first before we do Daniel 7. That way we hopefully will get all the scale correct. Let's turn to Daniel 11. Probably be easier to do it that way. So we're looking at Rome, and we want to see where Rome first comes into the scene or the story. So which verse do we go to see where Rome is first brought to view? Hopefully just the students might be able to address this. Verse 14. So, would you read verse 14 for us? Oh, you go ahead.
And in those times there shall many stand up against the king of the south. Also the robbers of thy people shall exalt themselves to establish the vision, but they shall fall.
So I'm just going to put the verse numbers underneath here. So when it says 14, it's verse 14. So here, pagan Rome is introduced by the title or the name of robbers of thy people. And what did we say the proper, a proper name for robbers is? It's not destroyer or the breakers of God's people. Yeah? So these are the breakers of God's people. And the time period that we're looking here, this verse covers a number of dates. And what's going on is there's a war that's going on between the king of the south and the king of the north. This is Greece. Greece is having this internal struggle, and what we would consider Greece, the Macedonians and the Syrians, have joined forces together, and now they're making war against Egypt, and Rome is going to start intervening in this discussion or this struggle. And this is around 200, I'm going to put 201 BC. It covers a time period just from around 202 BC to around 200-ish BC. So that's where verse 14 is, and it's the struggle between the king of the south and the king of the north, and Rome is going to start beginning to exalt itself and coming on the scene. And how do we understand the last part of the verse when it says, the robbers of thy people shall exalt themselves to establish the vision? How do we understand that? What vision are we talking about? We're talking about the Hazon vision. So when it says that he establishes himself, he establishes the vision, how do we understand what that means? He's going to fulfill the vision. He's going to make the vision stand. So, how's he going to make the vision stand?
It's the legs from Daniel 2, right?
I can't hear you, sorry.
It's the legs from Daniel 2.
Okay.
It's establishing the vision because first came Babylon and Medo-Persia, Greece, and now it's establishing again the vision that Rome is to follow.
Okay. I like turning to Daniel 8:23 when I think about this. When I think about this idea about establishing. So maybe Sister Min, you could read 8:23.
Who?
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. And in the latter time of their kingdom, when the transgressors are come to the full, the king of first countenance and understanding dark sentence shall stand up.
Okay, so what's that referring to? This history. So this history is talking about when it says, and in the latter times of their kingdom. So there is who? Greece. This is Greece. This is the goat with four notable horns. It says when their transgressions are coming to the full, where they're just about coming to the end of their kingdom, then a king of fierce countenance is going to come on the scene. And what's he going to do? He's going to understand dark sentences. So if you do a study on these dark sentences, you can tie this up together that this is related to the Hazon vision. So it doesn't say Hazon vision in the verse, but these dark sentences, when you tie them up with Matthew 13 and Psalm 49 and Psalm 78, you can do a nice study and tie that together, and you can see that these dark sentences that he's understanding is the Hazon vision. And because he understands the Hazon vision, then he can come to a place in 11:14.
Can you go through this tying together?
So if we would go to, I can do it. I don't know if I can do it from memory well enough. Matthew 13. Yeah, Matthew 13. 34 and 35, I think it is. Yeah, 35, it says that it might be, 34, all these things spake Jesus unto the multitude in parables, and without a parable spake he not unto them, that it might be fulfilled which was spoken by the prophet, saying, I will open my mouth in parables, I will utter dark sayings, which have been kept secret from the foundation of the world. So when you tie that verse 35, it's actually a quote from... Sorry?
I will utter things.
Oh, did I misread it? Oh, sorry, because I've got something. Oh, I've got dark things on my mind. Let me reread that then. Matthew 13. I will utter things which have been kept secret from the foundation of the world. So if we go to Psalm 49 and then Psalm 78. 49. And if we just pick up from verse 4, I will incline mine ear to a parable, I will open my dark saying upon the harp. So when we read verse 4, this is 49 verse 4, it says, I will incline my ear to a parable, I will open my dark saying upon the harp. In the Hebrew, it does this quite often. You'll get a verse, and it will make a statement, and then in the same verse, it will make another statement, and they seem like they're just two separate statements, but they're actually a repeat and enlarge. So these two statements are saying the same thing. Here it says a parable, and here it says, does it say dark saying?
Yep.
So this is where I got that dark saying from. And then in 78, it says the same thing. I will open my, verse 2, 78 verse 2, Psalms. I will open my mouth in a parable, I will utter dark sayings of old. So verse 2 is going to do the same thing. This is 78 verse 2. So here we have this parable, and here we have this dark. It says a dark saying of old.
I have Numbers 12:8 there too.
Sorry?
I have Numbers 12:8 along with the second.
Yes,
too.
and it says in Numbers
12:8.
12. So without going to all the verses, because you need to go into Numbers as well, and into Deuteronomy, this dark saying here is the same word. I can't remember the Hebrew word. You've probably got it. It's the same Hebrew word as in 8:23, in Daniel 8:23. So what I'm saying is that the parable that's spoken of in the book of Psalms is the dark saying or dark sentences of, so this is Psalms and this is Daniel 8, and if I stretch back here, this is what's being spoken of in Matthew 13, where Jesus is talking in parables. So Jesus is talking in parables, and what he's teaching you is truths that have been hidden for millennia. And he's going to bring out these spiritual truths, which are these parables. And these parables can be tied back to these two chapters in the book of Psalms. And it's the same dark sentences of Daniel chapter 8. You can identify who this king is from Deuteronomy. And then you'd go into the book of Numbers as well. I think you said Numbers 12:8. So you can tie all these thoughts together. I'm not going into detail of it, but when you tie these thoughts together, you can see that what's being spoken of here is the Hazon vision, which he establishes in 11:14, it says, because he understands this Hazon vision. He understands it, but God's people don't understand the Hazon vision. I suspect that probably doesn't answer your question to your satisfaction, but at least it gives you the logic that I'm using to tie up those pieces of information together.
And the sermon is online.
Yes,
So
yeah.
they can go back and
Yeah.
watch the sermon too.
It's the word kidah, 24:20 Hebrew.
Oh, these dark sentences?
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's the same word that's used in 8:23.
Right, there's 17 verses found in the same word.
Yeah. And I think basically a dark sentence is, I think the first definition is that it's a riddle.
A puzzle.
Yeah, a puzzle or a riddle of some kind. Oh, so it's basically a parable. He understands what the riddle is. He understands what's going on. And because he understands what's going on, he's in a position to fulfill that prophecy. And obviously, when I say that, I'm not referring to an individual man that he has. This is Satan at the back of all of this. Satan's going to make sure everything's going to go according to plan.
Is it Deuteronomy 28 that you're referring to?
Yeah.
What verse, just so I can look for my notes?
It's a king of fierce countenance. Is it?
Deuteronomy
50, yeah, 49 and 50. Yeah. So you can identify who that king of fierce countenance is.
Deuteronomy, I'm sorry, what?
28.
It's the same word.
No, this is just identifying who that king of fierce countenance is in 8:23. That's all he was asking.
Because it says the nation whose tongue thou shalt not understand.
Yeah.
And I've always associated that with the dark ages.
And then
49, you said?
49 and 50. All that's going to do is it's just going to tie up who the king of fierce countenance is in Daniel 8. It just ties those pieces together. But I'm suggesting that those dark sentences that have been spoken of is not just the fact that he's got a different language. It's to do with these prophetic visions that we're talking about.
Sorry, what verse was that in Deuteronomy?
28, 49 to 50. Yeah.
Do you understand it not to be connected with like the tongue that they shall not understand, or do you understand it to be both?
I used to think it was just talking about they don't understand that foreign language. But the reason why Aramaic and Hebrew are virtually the same language. So, actually no, forget that.
It would be Romans.
Yeah, that's why I just said forget that. It's because Deuteronomy, you can apply Deuteronomy 28 to Babylon as well. That's why that's where my mind was going. So, yeah.
I just wondered if it's both, because I see what you're saying. It's obvious.
I saw a presentation of someone was saying Latin was some kind of dark language.
I think that's what Brother Michael's
Yeah,
saying.
coming from Deuteronomy
Yeah.
28 and 49.
So I'm understanding the prophetic application of what's being discussed here. There's a few more verses that you need to put in together and read them carefully, that you can connect all of these things together. That the whole point, as far as I was understanding, is that when Jesus speaks parables, he does this to create two classes of people. And you can see that he does it at a specific time, and you can begin it at 9/11, where he begins to speak in parables at 9/11 for the sole purpose of creating two classes of people. And these parables that he's speaking here are the line upon line methodology that we're using, which is the dark sentences. They're all synonymous terms for the same thing. Line upon line, dark sentences, parables.
The everlasting gospel, we could take it also be a parable.
And that's where it leads to, yeah. It's a parable. It's taking two things that you line up next to each other for the purpose of comparison. I didn't hear what you said, Brother Marcus, sorry.
And Rome is the one then that understands this.
Yes,
Understands its place, its role in.
yes.
Okay.
So that's 11:14.
So, I'm sorry,
Yeah?
do they actually literally understand what they're doing?
No, I'm not saying literally understand. Satan literally understands what he's doing, and he's
Right.
directing movement. So I'm not
Some of
talking
the-
about.
The leaders of Vatican, do they actually know what they're involved in?
I don't know. They must have some idea what's going on. I always try to avoid getting into, conspiracy theories and thinking they have these
No,
secret
I wasn't
meetings.
even
I know,
thinking about
yeah, but I don't know. I'm talking about on a symbolic or spiritual level, as opposed to literal men understanding their role in history. I don't think Constantine or Justinian, they're doing everything for themselves. They're not there to help Rome, Papal Rome, get on the scene. So, verse 14. Verse 15. There's a continuation of this struggle that's going on. And verse 15, Antiochus Epiphanes comes on the scene in verse 15. But we want to look at verse 16. There's a lot of history in verse 16. So, Sister Alison, can you read verse 16 for us?
Is it what chapter?
We're in Daniel 11, verse 16.
But he that cometh against him shall do according to his own will, and none shall stand before him. And he shall stand in the glorious land, which by his hand shall be consumed.
So the first part of the verse, it says, but he that cometh against him shall do according to his own will, and none shall stand before him. I've got this continuation of this war that's going on here between Rome and Greece, the king of who used to be the king of the north. But by verse 16, the king of the north now is now pagan Rome. Pagan Rome is now being identified as the king of the north. And there's this continuation of the battle. And I want to pick up the year 168. This is verse 16. So 168, there's an important war. There's an important battle between Rome and Macedonia. And does anybody know what that battle was, these students? So that was the Battle of Pydna. And the Battle of Pydna is a significant event from the switch from Greece to pagan Rome. If you go to any evangelistic campaign that the church does, this is where they will always mark the transition from Greece to pagan Rome. It's 168, and what they're marking is the Battle at Pydna. That's where all the ones I've ever seen, that's if you see in diagrams or charts, it's always marked at 168, the transition. And sorry, yeah.
Is that the significant date for prophecy, or is that just when Rome would transition? Because 158 is when the time of the league was.
Yeah.
And that's when they come in connection with God's people. So my question is, when he stands in the glorious land, is that what you're addressing? As
No.
Okay.
So the bit I'm addressing, he says, but he that cometh against him shall do according to his own will, and none shall stand before him. It's just before that. That's 168. And 168, I think it has prophetic significance, but it's a date where you begin to transition from those two empires. And then the next part of the verse. Actually, yeah, so there's a continuation that's going on. This struggle begins in 168, and the next date that I want to pick up is 63. Not 63 or 64?
63.
Yeah. Actually, I think I want 64. So, no. So 64 is still verse 16. And 64, he's going to go from Macedonia, which is what we understand to be Greece. Now he's moving into Syria. So this is the campaign by Pompey, General Pompey. He's going to subdue the Syrian. They're not the Syrians, but they're. This is the Seleucid tree, Seleucid family in AD 60. So we're still in BC 64. Yeah, some people say 65, some people say 64. I think Smith says 65, doesn't he? I think. And then he's going to gain into verse 16, he's going to get to 63 BC. So I'm going to stop putting BC because I'm going to run out of room otherwise. So here's 63 BC. And that's located in the verse. It says, and he shall stand in the glorious land. So the glorious land that's been identified here is 63 BC. And then if we'll skip through the verses, but...
So hold on. I thought the glorious land was 158
1:5.
BC.
That's the league between the Jews and the Romans. I don't think verse 16 is identifying this. This is going from... He's going to show how he's going to progressively take down everything. We could skip through all the verses from verse 16. It talks about all this history. Then I just wanted to go down to verse 22.
Excuse me.
Yeah.
What happened in 64?
64. the Roman Empire is having problems with Syria, who are the remnants of Greece, basically. They've been subjugated, but they're still trying to exert themselves. So they send General Pompey to go and subdue and take control of the eastern part of the empire. So he goes to what we understand the geography of Syria and basically stamps on them and reinforces Roman authority upon the Syrians. So that's in 64, and then he goes into the glorious land at the same time and just finishes it off.
So the rest,
Syria, not us. Sorry?
so the rest of the Greek Empire is finally subdued.
Yes.
It's gone.
So this was the first and the second obstacle which pagan Rome had to overcome.
The first. When you say the first and the second, what would you?
North, Daniel 8, north, east, and the glorious land.
So in Daniel 8 verse 9, it says the south, the east, and the pleasant land. This is the east.
64 is the east.
So this is the east. This is the east of Daniel 8 verse 9, and this is the glorious land. So this is 8, 9. This one isn't identified. So this is the first part of the two steps that it's going to go to. Then in verse 31 AD, it's not going to identify 31 BC, the Battle of Actium in this section that we're looking at. But if you go down to 22, so if someone can read 22.
The arms of a flood shall they be overflown from before him, and shall be broken, yea, also the prince of the covenant.
So 22 is going to take you all the way down to 31 AD. So this is the crucifixion of Christ. And we're now in AD 31. And this is lining up with Daniel 8, verse 11. So we're in verse 23. So, Brother Colin, if you can read verse 23.
And after the league made with him, he shall work deceitfully, for he shall come up and shall become strong with a small people.
So in Daniel 11, you get a repeat and enlarge in two segments. So here we've seen how pagan Rome is going to begin to exert itself from verse 14 all the way to verse 22 until he exalts himself against Christ. So there's this continual exaltation that's going on. And now verse 23 is going to take you back into history. So it's going to be repeat and enlarge. And this is the league of between the Jews and the Romans that you were mentioning.
I think the reason he mentions that is because Smith takes that league and says 23 brings you back to the standing in the glorious land in verse 16. So he says that the league made with the Jews is the standing in the glorious land. That's right, Smith.
Okay.
That's why he's making that connect.
Right.
I made the same thing because, and then I've taken and said, well, then we go back into the history of verse 16 and then continue forward with a different perspective being emphasized.
Yeah, I think it's dealing with the same history but from a different perspective. So verse 23 is going to take us here to 158. This is verse 23. And then we'd go into verse 24. So let's read verse 24. Brother Michael?
He shall enter peaceably even upon the fattest places of the province. And he shall do that which his fathers have not done, nor his fathers' fathers. He shall scatter among them the prey, the spoil, and riches. Yea, and he shall forecast his devices against the strongholds even for a time.
So, verse 24, we've got 158 here, and verse 24 is going to begin where? 31 BC, okay, so we're back here. Here's 31 BC. and it's going to go from 31 BC to 330 AD. And this is verse, I'll put it down here this way. This is verse 24. So verse 24 covers this history here. And here, 31 BC, this is the south of Daniel 8, verse 9. Does that make sense? Sorry? That's the south of Daniel 8, 9. It's picking up 31 BC. So we went from 14 to 22, and it goes from when he begins to come on the scene, or the stage of prophetic history, around 200 BC. He's going to start interfering into the affairs of Greece. Takes you all the way down to the crucifixion of Christ in 31 AD. And then verse 23 is going to take you back, and it's going to begin in 158 BC, the league between the Jews and the Romans. Then it's going to take you to 31 BC, and then into 330 AD.
168, Pidna is where he receives the title, King of the North. That was you.
Yeah, so my argument is that right here is where he receives the title for the King of the North.
And then he can move forward and start conquering those
Yeah.
three geographical locations.
Wasn't there like multiple wars? Like there were war, like this is the third war or something?
In this time period here, yeah, there are multiple wars, but just like another battle that I can't remember, the Battle of Pydna, it seems to be a significant battle because once that's done, everything's sorted out. It's like 508. So between 476 and 538, there are many, many battles, many, many wars. But 508 seems to have some uniqueness about it, that once that event happens, it's everything's sorted out. I think we were talking yesterday where Jesus says at the cross, it is finished. So, what's actually finished at the cross? In one level, not much, because we've got thousands of years of history to go through. But it's at that stage, he knows who's going to win and who's going to lose. So that's how I kind of understand 168.
Well, what's finished at the cross is that humanity is given another chance.
Yes,
It's just, it's confirmed.
but it doesn't go into... You can't really see it at that stage.
Where she says it.
Yeah. I wasn't trying to make any deep spiritual point about the cross. So we read verse 24 and verse 25 all the way down to verse 28 is going to be speaking about this time period here. AD 31, so let me put just an arrow down here. This is 25 to 28. Sorry? 31 BC. This is 31 BC. I've not put the BCs down, otherwise I'm going to run out of room. So there's lots of things going on here. This is the struggle between Mark Antony and Caesar Augustus and Cleopatra and all the intrigue that goes on there. And then we get to verse 29. So verse 29 says, "At the time appointed he shall return and come towards the south, but it shall not be as the former or as the latter." So I'm marking 29 as being here. So between 331 BC and 330 AD, this period of 360 years, we know that Rome is ruling from pagan Rome is ruling from the city of Rome, and it's invincible. And in verse 29 says, "At the time appointed," when he comes to the end of this time prophecy, then he's going to try and carry on doing his exploits. But this time, things don't work out as they happen in the past, or as they're going to happen in the future. So how I'm reading this verse is that he says from this time onwards, things start going bad for pagan Rome. When he starts engaging in warfare, nothing's going to start working out for him in the way that it did before and in the way that's going to be in the future. So I'm taking, when it says, but it shall not be as the former, it's talking about all of this time way back down here where he destroyed and overtook Egypt, particularly in 31 BC. And you can go back to 47 BC. We didn't mark 47 BC in here, but 47 BC is, I think, Julius Caesar. Julius Caesar's going to go into Egypt. He's going to conquer and succeed there. 31 BC, the same thing is happening, but now when they start engaging, things are not working as they used to. And then the last part of the verse, it says, or as the latter. So I'm placing that latter into verse 40, Daniel 11 verse 40, because when he comes again in the future and he starts making war against the king of the south, things are going to go well for him.
Okay. I don't know. I just, as the latter, I've understood, again, it's only because you're Smith, but because he addresses that him doing exploits, he does it twice. He does it once against Egypt in 31, and then the Holy Covenant. It says he shall do exploits. It says, sorry, and his heart shall be against the Holy Covenant, and he shall do exploits and return to his own land. He marks that as 70 AD, the destruction of Jerusalem. And then it says,
Which verse are we in, sorry?
in 28.
Okay.
So he marks that. He says that 31. He does.
Yeah, I've got 28. I've got AD 70 as 28. Yeah.
Yes. So then, when it says former and latter, because both of them are past tense, it says as the former thing and as the latter of the two former things. So he's going to. It shall not be as the time he conquered Egypt, and it shall not be as the time he conquered Jerusalem. The future for him is not good.
Okay. Yeah.
But anyways,
I'm okay with that. Does everybody understand what he just said? Let's read. I skipped over verse 28. Let's go to verse 28. Sister Tiffany.
Then shall he return into his land with great riches, and his heart shall be against the holy covenant, and he shall do exploits and return to his own land.
So I've got here that this is talking about Caesar Augustus. After all this struggle in AD 31 and the ensuing conflict, he's going to go back to Rome with great riches, the riches of Egypt. Then it says his heart shall be against the holy covenant. So I'm going to put AD 70 here.
Couldn't it be Diocletian as well?
Yes, when it says he shall return unto his land with great riches, I'm marking that as Caesar Augustus. But when it says, and his heart shall be against the holy covenant, I'm not marking that as the same emperor. It's skipping, at least 100 years plus there. So I've got AD 70 here where it says, and his heart shall be against the holy covenant, and he shall do exploits and return to his own land.
Kind of link it with the 10 days in Smyrna.
Which bit would you link?
Persecution in Smyrna. His heart shall be against the holy covenant.
Oh, okay. You want to mark that as Diocletian.
And then
yeah.
After that, he does exploits and returns. The two times he returns is what's being addressed by Uriah Smith. The first return is after Egypt. The second is after the destruction of Jerusalem. And there's histories that.
So is he marking AD 70 or Diocletian in that history?
He only addresses the return.
Okay.
So AD 70 is where he addresses return, like you've got.
Okay, so we've got a return here in 31 BC. And we've got a return here.
And that's the former and the latter, according to Uriah Smith.
Okay.
I have it marked in my Bible at the time of appointment 330 AD, but I don't know why.
Yeah.
Where? Which verse?
29 at the time of appointment.
Yes, so I'm saying, that's why I'm saying 330. That's what I'm saying. So, in 31 BC, he's going to Egypt. He's going to subjugate Egypt, going to get all of his riches and he's going to return back home. So that's the return. And then he's going to do the same in AD 70. He's going to go to the glorious land, destroy the glorious land, and then he's going to return. And so Uriah Smith is saying in verse 29, at the time appointed he shall return and come toward the south, but it shall not be as the former or as the latter. So he's making this the former and this the latter. So that might be a better way of understanding verse 29.
But I do see your point, though, that he's returning towards the south. So the subject is the south.
Yeah.
So the former would be the time he conquered the south, and the latter would be the time in verse 40. So, Uriah Smith doesn't have to be.
Yeah.
Right, but that's just what he said.
Has anybody got lost so far? Okay, what we lost on? There's no point in going forward if we're lost. You've got to tell me what you lost there on.
Can you just repeat again how he returns and former and latter? So
Okay. Are we lost on what the purpose of all of this is about? Hoping we're not. The purpose is, at least on one level, try and understand these verses. These verses are important to understand because they're going to take us. We're already 330 AD, and they're going to take us to 1798, 1844. But it's worthwhile noting that we haven't spent a lot of time in these verses ever, and this is just our first sweep at it. Because whatever's happening here, it must have an end time application. If we're going to make an end time application of 2, 7, and 8, those chapters, 11 must have an end time application. So we need to know something about the history. So this is just a kind of a first foray into this discussion. So 14 to 22 was one history of how Rome begins to exalt itself. Then from 23, and we've got to 29, it's doing it again. But it's got different start dates. It's around 200. I would mark from 14 to 23. I would be marking this is the key start date, and in verse 23 this is the key start date. So there's two start dates: 158, the league with the Jews, and 168, where he has this engagement with Greece. So we've gone through the verses, and we've seen how some of these verses parallel information that we know in Daniel chapter 8. We've got verse 16, which parallels chapter 8, verse 9, and we've got verses 25 to 28, which parallel the same verses. The east, the glorious land, and the south. So we've got those three things. And then we went from verse 24, it takes you to this prophecy of the 360 years. We've already discussed verses 25 to 28. Then verse 22 we marked as AD 31. Actually, forget that. And then in verse 28 we're marking two things. We're marking AD 31 BC and AD 70. So they're two dates that we're marking from verse 28. And then verse 29 says, when you get to the end of this time prophecy in 330 AD, then the king of the north, pagan Rome, is going to become weak. However we understand what that history is, what those words mean, it's from this time onward, he becomes weak. So dropping back into 28, it says, then shall he, and I'm marking this as Caesar Augustus, returning to his land with great riches. I'm connecting that part of the verse with verses 25, 26, and 27. 25, 26, and 27 is the story of the Battle of Actium and the ensuing warfare between Mark Antony and Caesar Augustus and Cleopatra, this sort of love affair that they have. So verse 28 says he's going to return into his land with great riches. So here's we've got a return. So the king of the north is returning back to his land after he destroys the king of the south. Then it says, and his heart shall be against the holy covenant. So this work that's been brought to view against the Holy Covenant is being marked as AD 70, where he's going to destroy Jerusalem. And it says, he shall do exploits and return to his own land. So in AD 70, the king of the north is going to bring down the glorious land, destroy Jerusalem, and then he's going to return back to his own land. So there's these two returns that are in the verse. And then verse 29 says, at the time appointed, he, the king of the north, shall return and come towards the south. So after this period, he's going to continue to try and make war with the king of the south, but it says, but it shall not be as the former or as the latter. So Uriah Smith is saying the former was this warfare and the latter was this warfare. And what I was suggesting was that because it's talking about the king of the south, that I agree that this was the former, but I was putting the latter down here in verse 40.
Which it may well be.
So Brother Parminder, the way I'm viewing this, it's like a battle of standing. You have all these kings that are trying to stand, to make this vision stand.
Yeah.
So it's basically a battle between the kingdoms of Satan and the kingdom of God. But at the very end, the kingdom of God will overpower all these kingdoms and crush them to the ground, and God's kingdom will stand.
Yes. So when we're looking at this Hazon vision, there's always two threads running. There's one thread that nation is rising against nation. Mm-hmm. You know, that's just political history. It has that theme to it, but it also has the theme of the scattering that runs through it as well, where these nations are also subjugated and bringing war against God's people, this punishment that he's bringing. So there's these two themes that are always running through these visions, and you see them as you go along. So as we've gone through here, you can see how pagan Rome is just going to come and destroy Greece. So that's one thought, but there's this other thought. In that process, it's also going to be punishing or scattering God's people. And you see them in all of the visions. Verse 30. For the ships of Chittim shall come against him. Therefore he shall be grieved and return, and have indignation against the holy covenant. So shall he do. He shall even return and have intelligence with them that forsake the holy covenant. So this is the verse that we were looking at, and I don't have complete resolution on it, but I think it's quite problematic, and I don't fully understand exactly what this verse is saying. But there's some things we do understand. We know from verse 29 that we're in this period from 330 AD onwards. And we know that there's this struggle between the ships of Chittim and the king of the north. So there's a warfare between Chittim and the king of the north. And in the midst of this, he says he's going to have intelligence with them that forsake the holy covenant. So I'm marking the beginning and the ending of these verses as, if I put it here.
Do you know who represents Chittim?
Yeah, so we'll discuss that in a second. I'm just trying to put a time frame on it. So I'm going to put 533 to 534. And this is verse 30. So I'm saying that verse 30 is covering, let me do it this way, is covering this history here. This is verse 30. So do we have, for those who have some understanding of the verses, do we agree with that? That this is the history of verse 30. 330 to 533. Yeah? So let's look at Chittim. So we're going to identify Chittim as being the Vandals. I was doing a study recently, and it was about Daniel 2, not recently, it was a while back, and someone was listening over Skype, I think it was, and I said, you know, as we know, these 3 horns are plucked up. It was between 2 and 8, Daniel 2 and Daniel 7. I said, three horns were plucked up, the Heruli, the Vandals, and the Ostrogoths. They're totally annihilated, you can't see these people anywhere, and you've only got 7 European powers. And there was someone on the other side of the Skype conversation who I'd never met before. I didn't know who the person was, and they said, "No, that's wrong. That's wrong." They said, "I'm a Vandal," and I thought, "What? I've never heard of that before." They said, "Yeah, I'm a Vandal. The Vandals are still in existence. They weren't annihilated. They're still around," and I didn't know what they were talking about. And they said, "Because they're Scandinavian." That's not how you spell Scandinavian, but I think it's my closest version of it. Scandinave. I've not even a V in there. Scan. S-C-A-N.
At the very beginning.
Oh, it's right from the wrong. S-C. That's what I had, isn't it? Oh, Scandi.
You had it all right except for the C.
Oh, okay, Scandinavian. So this person said, "I'm Scandinavian," and I thought, okay, I back down. I'm wrong. I have to go back into my history. And this person's right. The Vandals come from Scandinavia. There's some kind of Scandinavian tribes, and sometime in history they moved from Scandinavia to a place called. Let me see if I can pronounce this correctly. Let me get the name of it correct. It's called a place called. Sorry? Brother Jack's Scandinavian. He might be a Vandal then. Oh dear. It's the second Vandal I've engaged with. There's a place called Pannonia. Pannonia. Now the thing is, if you look at Pannonia and you go to, I think I've given you a printed sheet on this, which was about the 10 kings, and there was a table that had all the 10 horns. Pannonia is identified as the Visigoths or the Goths. So on your little table it says the Visigoths or Goths. But these Vandals, they started off in Scandinavia and they moved to a place called Pannonia. And Pannonia is basically Hungary, Austria, Poland, Serbia, Croatia. It's part of Eastern Europe. Obviously the boundaries have all changed, but it's that kind of area there. And so they moved from Scandinavia to this area, and sometime afterwards they get kicked out of that place and the Goths take over. So that's why we put the Visigoths or the Goths as, if you see pioneer writings, as Pannonia. Maybe I should write that down in case you want to look at it. It's Pannonia. That's my pronunciation. Pannonia, is that correct? No? Pannonia, that sounds better. Pannonia. So they moved from Scandinavia to Pannonia, and they're moving there actually around 330 AD. So we can begin to see the Vandals coming on the scene around 330 AD.
Because they've been displaced.
Yes. So in 330 AD, they're settling in Pannonia, and now they're going to be pushed by the Goths, and they're going to be pushed west. So my maps are terrible, as you all know. So this is my version of Europe. This is the Black Sea. This is the Mediterranean Sea, and this is North Africa. So this is North Africa. And I knew someone would pick that up. So there's Italy. This is the Straits of Gibraltar, the Bosphorus Straits, the Black Sea, the Mediterranean and the Atlantic. And Scandinavia is up here. So they start here, they go to somewhere around here, and by 330 AD they're on the scene of prophetic history, I'm suggesting. So you can pick up the Vandals from 330 AD, and then they're going to be moved on by the Goths over here, and they're going to go westward, and they're going to go into Iberia, into Spain, and eventually they're going to cross the Straits of Gibraltar, and then they're going to come into North Africa. So they make this big circuitous route.
There's a huge irony with what happens with them too, because they were going to fight, they were going to be hired mercenaries, and they were going to fight over in Carthage, and they go there, and the king's like, wait, no, never mind, or the Caesar's like, or the emperor's like, no, never mind, and then they're like, you know what, forget this, and they attack anyways.
Yeah.
This is how they come into power.
So that's right when they get to, so that we know, Brother Michael's just mentioned Carthage. Carthage is around here, and this is modern, I think it's Tunisia. So this is modern Tunisia, Carthage. So 330 AD, they're on the scene here, and through the 400s, the 4th century, they're going to start moving all the way down and coming to North Africa. By 409, they're in Spain. By 429, they're in North Africa. And by 429, now Genseric, who's the most famous leader, comes on the scene. So Genseric is around here in 429. And by 439, this is the key date, by 439, they've established their empire. And their empire is quite large. They've got most of North Africa, and they've got, Cyprus is around here, and there's a number of other islands that are around there. They've got control of, let me put it in another colour.
Isn't Cyprus on the other side?
Yeah.
You're probably going to, yeah, that's Sicily, yeah. I knew, oh dear. My maps are going, they're already breaking to pieces. So let me see if I got a better map. Yeah, I was thinking of another map, another place. I was thinking of Sardinia here. So I'm going to put this back here. This is Sardinia.
Oh, is that where Sardis is?
No, Sardis is up here.
Oh,
This is Sardinia. So I'll leave that one there. It was Sardinia I'm thinking of. But they have control of Cyprus as well, maybe. So all I'm saying is this. They own all of this territory here. A lot of geography. And they're a seafaring nation, and because they own all of these islands and North Africa, they're able to control all the traffic that's all the economic traffic that occurs between Africa and Europe, because 1,500 years ago, I don't know what the climate was like 1,500 years ago, but North Africa was the breadbasket of Europe. That's where they got all their grain, and so when they have control of this, it has a serious impact on what's happening.
Can you quickly go through dates? 409 they're in Spain.
409 they're in Spain. 429 they're in North Africa. And by 439 they've established a kingdom. And this establishment of the kingdom is that they've not only got North Africa, but they've taken all of these islands that are in the Mediterranean.
This is in reference to the Vandals now.
This is all of this is the Vandals. The Vandals are Chittim, and that's why it's called the ships of Chittim, because they made their warfare. They were a naval nation, basically.
Doesn't Ryan Smith say something about why he didn't go south and conquer the riches of Africa, but he decided to go north and some kind of divine thing? Something to do, because he could have went south and had an easier time and just got even richer and bigger, but he decided to go north and attack Rome.
I don't know.
He wanted to be a part of Rome for a really long time, from my understanding.
Okay.
He kept trying to be a part of it through different
He was a general.
marriages and different things, but it didn't work out, and he got really frustrated by it, and he just tried to conquer
He had
it.
a huge beef with Rome.
Yeah. Because they wouldn't let him into the wealth
the
of
inner
Rome.
circle,
Yeah, the inner circle.
Because he was a barbarian.
So by 455, he sacks Rome. He basically takes Rome, he captures Rome. Sacks. S-A-C-K-S.
What does that mean?
Ransacks.
Yeah.
Oh, Sax. In
The
the
sack
like
of
Saxon.
To
Ransack.
attack or to-
Ransacks.
Is that better? He ransacks Rome, and so here we've got the Vandals beginning 330 AD, and up to 477, they're basically increasing, and they're invincible in this time period here. And then by 477, Genseric dies, and after 477. So in this one, I'm just going to put an arrow to say they're in the ascendancy, and from here onwards, they start coming down. So that's the history of 330. Oh, sorry, of verse
When you're saying
30.
they, that's again talking about
The Vandals.
going down.
Yeah, the Vandals are on the ascendancy, and by the time you get to this latter part where Genseric is on the scene, Genseric is 674, I think it is. Let me just check. I think it's 674.
674.
No. 428. 428? Is that what you had? 428, yeah. From 428, because he ruled for a long time, from 428 to 477, nobody can defeat them. When he dies in 477, then all the kings that come after him are just weak kings, and Rome begins to make war with the Vandals, and they eventually succeed. So verse 30 takes you to the year 534, and the year 534 is when... What happens in 534? This is when they've completed the... They come... So Justinian's general is going to go to North Africa in 533, and they return by 534. So this is the end of the Vandals. So we mark the end of the Vandals in 534. Is that right? So that's a potted history of verse 30, but there.
Short question: why is it the end of the Vandals? Did they had a controversy with the Roman Empire? Or?
Yes. So there's a controversy going on right back from around here, at least in 428, 429. They've entered North Africa in 429. They've established a kingdom by 439, and they're now taking territory that Rome owns.
Okay, so Rome fights them back.
Yeah.
And destroys them in 530.
So they've been having this ongoing warfare with them for 200 years. Well, 100 years. No, it's not even 100 years, is it? Yeah, if we take 428, coming up to about 100 years, and most of the time they've lost all of that war. They've not been able to...
Eastern Rome.
This is Eastern Rome. Western Rome is involved in this as well, both of them. Both parties are trying to make war against them.
What 428 and 477, is that the wars?
This is Genseric. I'll put G. This is the reign of Genseric. We mark 476 as the how would you describe that? As the end of the Roman Empire in the West, 476. The reason we mark 476 as that is because that's when the king of the Heruli, the king of the Heruli takes over Italy, actually, I think he rules over Rome. So the reason I'm mentioning that is because that's 476, which is near to here, and 428, when Genseric's on this warpath, you know that you still have essentially Roman emperors in the West who have some level of control or some semblance. So, to answer your question, it's not just a fight with the East; it's the fight with the West as well, because the West has still Roman emperors who, at some level, have got some level of control.
But if we say that in 476, Western Rome is no more, so how can we say now in 533 and 534 that they fight both East and West against the Vandals?
Oh no, that particular at the end it's not the East and the West.
It's just the East.
Yeah, at the end it's just the East. Sorry, if that's what I didn't understand your question. I thought you meant just the whole time period.
Yeah, no, that's
yeah.
fine. Okay.
At the end, this is just the East. So this is the Eastern Roman Empire. This is Justinian.
A huge part of the dynamics that exist here, which is really interesting, is that each of these major ransacks on Rome that took place by barbarians that were connected to the Roman government, because the Romans had this huge prejudice against the barbarians, and that kind of like pervaded through the atmosphere there. So these guys who are attacking Genseric and Odoacer, they were, if you look historically, they were connected with the emperors. They were generals. They were of their own armies. They were hired mercenaries. They were part of the Roman Empire, and because of the prejudice that existed, they started attacking the Roman Empire. So it like destroyed from within.
Yes.
What's a mercenary like?
A mercenary.
A hired soldier. They hired whole armies because the Western Empire was so weak. Because, and there's so many dynamics, but because the Western Empire was so weak, they couldn't feed or supply their armies, and their armies kind of dwindled away, so they had to hire out mercenaries. That's where the barbarians come in and destroy it.
So from 477 onward, you've got a number of weak Vandal kings coming up. Now, in the midst of all this issue, this warfare between two empires, there's a religious struggle that's going on as well. There's kind of like a three-way religious struggle. There's a struggle between the Catholics and the Arians, and there's another group which I can never remember the name of.
What is the true date that the Catholic actually came on the scene of the history?
There it is. Mono. AST. So then we're going to have a go at ICISA.
Monasticism.
Yeah.
What is it?
So there's a struggle that's going on. Yeah, I don't think it's no. It's not monasticism I'm looking for. It's monotheism.
Monasticism is
Yeah.
monks, right?
So I'm just put monotheism. This is the prevalent religion in Constantinople. Greek Orthodox, if you like. This is in Rome, and this is we'll put the Vandals because that's the history that we're dealing with. But many of these horns, these 10 tribes, are Aryan, and there's this whole warfare that's going on between them. So there's this struggle that's going on between these three religious entities, and as you're going through all of these various Vandal kings, some of them aren't worried about religion, but many of them are. And in Carthage, in North Africa, there's this continual struggle between the Arians and the Catholics. Some kings are lenient towards the Catholics, and some of these Vandal kings are quite severe, and they want to destroy and kill them, and they want to expel any kind of semblance of Catholicism in Carthage.
Looking at
Oh.
Catholicism came into the history. Where did it originate? When did it actually identify the sort of the religion as Catholicism?
I don't know off the top of my head.
Before this.
It is before this, though. Yeah. Oh.
I think this is a very difficult question. Catholics would say it starts with Peter,
Yeah.
Yeah.
and it's like a slow process over the different councils, over the centuries. They develop what they believe. And
We would say that they're the mystery of iniquity.
Well,
Th-
Catholicism
300,
is universal.
300 after Christ, there is definitely a bishop in Rome already. But
When
it's
is it?
300 something.
With the Arians, you're classifying the Vandals with the Arians?
That's their religion. Yeah. That's the religion, and that's the name of the nation.
So Arian is a religion? So it,
Yeah,
but Arians exist today.
they do. What is Arianism?
I thought it was a race. My mom's an Aryan, so she's from Austria.
Oh well, no. So when we think about Arians in that kind of so that's what. Yeah, maybe we should. It's not that kind of Arianism that we're talking about.
I don't have a clue.
Yeah,
Pantheism.
it's not pantheism.
I thought the way they explained, they only believe in God the Father and the Son, that there's no Holy Spirit as a person.
Yeah, so that's it's connected with that. There's the Father and the Son, and not Holy Spirit.
They deny the Trinity according to the Catholics.
Yes, but also that Jesus is the Son of God,
They believe that Jesus is the Son of God.
but as a Son,
Not as a god.
not as he's kind of what.
Son.
Yeah, he was created by the Father.
Oh, I see.
So there's this kind of
Okay.
hierarchy, and so there's this struggle that's going on in this time period between the Trinitarians and the Arians, and the monotheists have this other view as well. So their view is this, that the Catholics believe that when Jesus came, he had a dual nature. He had a divine nature and a human nature. Divinity in humanity. So do we believe that? Yeah, so that's what the Catholics would believe in. But these monotheists, they believe that when Christ came as a human being, that he only had one nature. So there was this constant struggle between all of them. So
That's not monotheism then.
no, I'm going to have to maybe get the correct name of it. I've got it in my notes, but I've got so many notes. It's hard to track everything now.
Monotheism is Adventism.
And when you just
It's just
believe in
one God.
God.
That's
Yeah,
what monotheism.
yeah. It's really to do with the nature of Christ.
Or Jewish.
This issue that they've got there.
And the Jews believe in the Godhead too? Like,
So
same like this?
one of the most important things that are going to go on here is that between the year 533 and 534, Justinian is going to he's going to write or have commissioned a set of books. I can't remember the name of them because they're in Latin, and it's called Corpus Juris Civilius.
What year period was it?
533 to 534. And I think this is the secular term, if it's the right way of saying it, when we talk about he has intelligence. So what he's doing is, what this is a series of books, it's a series of law books of how you actually have, I think they call it jurisprudence. So has everybody heard of jurisprudence? Jurisprudence is basically the study of law. He's going to start defining what law is, and he writes these law books. Not literally, he writes it. And when he writes these law books, he's going to start integrating this whole issue that you're going to have a state religion. And when he starts defining about this state religion, he's going to basically make the Catholics the state religion. He's going to promote them. And, you know, when we talk about it on the message, we say in 533, he has intelligence with them that forsake the Holy Covenant, and he makes him the corrector of heretics. So you've probably heard that kind of phraseology used on the message, that 533, he makes the Pope and Rome the corrector of heretics. But the secular kind of bit about this is he writes this series of books, which isn't just covering religious law, but it's covering many, many issues of it, and you can have a read of that. And this is the intelligence that he's having, and he writes it in the time period between 533 and 534.
Is this where that? No, that's a letter.
Is that supposed to be civilis?
Civilis.
Could you say civilius?
That's because I don't know how to read properly.
It's I.
Let me check if I've got the...
It means the body of civil law.
Civilis. Civilis.
Can you repeat what you were saying? That
So what I'm saying is, this is Justinian. He's gonna basically make a statement about what Roman law is going to look like in the Middle Ages. He's going to redefine Roman law. That's his purpose. And in the midst of all of this, he's going to start, when he writes this law book, that's what it's basically is. It's how this country, this nation is going to be run. So he's going to rewrite the statute books. And he's going to now make a statement about how religion gets involved in law. And he's going to start leaning over towards the Catholics. So he's going to start making the Catholicism essentially the state religion. He doesn't quite phrase it that way. He says things like, you have to be a Christian. It's against the law not to be a Christian. And a whole swathe of other things, so that the state religion is going to be Christian, and you're forced by law to hold to that religion, which is what happens after him in virtually every single European country after that. You know, if you're of another religion that isn't the state religion, you're going to be persecuted, imprisoned, fined, and maybe even killed. So he begins this process, and this is what we mark in the verse where it says he has intelligence with them that forsake the Holy Covenant. And you'll have heard in presentations before when they use the term, he makes the Pope the corrector of heretics. He's deciding in his because in his part of the realm where he lives here, these people who have this strange view of Christ, they hold one view and the Catholics hold another view. And he's going to decide who's going to be the people who are going to come to supremacy, and he's going to choose Rome. So part of all of this other issue is that he has a religious warfare against the Vandals as well, because the Vandals are persecuting Catholics. So this isn't just an economic war, this is a religious war between Justinian, who for all intents and purposes is a Catholic, and the Vandals, who are persecuting Catholics. So there's a religious war that's going on in the midst of all of this. It's an economic and an economic and a religious war. And in the midst of this, they're going to start putting on the statute books how you're going to have your religion, and what the religion is going to be, what it's going to look like, and what you're allowed to do and what you're not allowed to do.
So when there was this intelligence with Reagan and Pope Paul II, do you reckon there was
1984.
some kind of law that was done? If we're saying that that's the intelligence for our time.
I'm not sure if it is. I know people say that it is, but I'm just saying, I'm just trying to just grapple with the history before I make an application.
Okay.
Because as I've looked at this more, it seems the histories are much more involved than I first That's all it did, and it may change the view that we have about what's happened, what we're saying.
I missed what you said. Is this where this body of works that was done? Is this where he publishes that the Pope is the what's the phrase?
Corrector of heretics.
Corrector of
Yeah,
heretics.
it's
This is where he said-
part and parcel of all of that. You know, sometimes the way we describe it is that he just stands up one day and makes this statement.
I thought there was a letter. that he wrote.
And there's a letter as well.
Okay.
There's a letter that's connected to this, and that's to Pope. I think he's Pope John II. I think it's John II. So there's a Pope that's coming on the scene, and he comes on the scene in 533. There's a new Pope on the scene in 533. And what Justinian does with this Pope is he writes him a letter, as you've just said, and he basically befriends him, and he says, you know, you and I are friends, and you're the one, and not all these other people. But he's not going to just leave it at that. He's not just making a statement. It's going to go into the statute books. It's going to be embedded in law. And so this law is brought to view in these in these series of books.
Is that
So-
where church and state began to be
Yeah.
married?
I'm not sure if it's began, but it's definitely now in the statute books that it's now against the law to live in this country and not be a Christian. A Catholic Christian is what the intent is all about.
So that these dates, 533 and 534, is the date when the Catholic Church comes into power.
I'm reticent to say that because it's such a progressive nature.
Yeah, I can see that. But
That if we want to mark one event, I don't know which date we'd want to mark, but I wouldn't want to mark it as they come into power. It's just another nail in this step that's happening.
So then, why is it on 606 AD? There's another statement by the Pope making himself some sort of, I don't remember the statement.
Yeah. So there's something that happens in 606, and I think the name is Focus. I don't know how to pronounce it. It's something like that. There's a discussion between a Roman emperor and a pope, and this Roman emperor is going to make the pope the corrector of heretics. It's very similar to what the situation is that's happening here. Some people look to 606 as the key date where you get where the pope has this religious authority given by the civil state. But we understand it's actually in this time period here. It's before 606. The 606 and this date are essentially the same events that are happening. They're the same events.
And then Islam's brought into it.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, 606 is definitely marked the rising of Muhammad.
So 606. The reason why they have it, part of the reason why they're having this struggle is there's a three-way battle going on. I don't know if that was the right word. There's Eastern Rome is warring against the Persians, so you've got this conflict here, and in the midst of this conflict, he's going to make the Pope the corrector of heretics to gain support from the West, which is the same scenario that's kind of happening here. But 533 is the date that we mark as that effect. Sister Parminder.
So if I'm understanding correctly, it says in verse 30, for the Vandals come against paganism, or this power that we're talking about, the Catholics, right?
Against pagan Rome.
Okay, pagan
Yeah.
Rome. They come against him, and pagan Rome's upset, and so they return, and they have indignation against the Holy Covenant. What's that indignation against the Holy Covenant, and where are we marking that?
So I've struggled with this to actually mark a date. So the first part of the verse, for the ships of Chittim shall come against him, therefore he shall be grieved and return. Now, I've tried to understand what this part of the verse means, but it's talking about this history, at least 428 to 477, but maybe even before. As the Vandals are rising to supremacy, they're going to start making war against pagan Rome, and pagan Rome can't defeat them. So they're coming against him, and he's grieved because he can't fight.
Pagan Rome's upset.
Yeah,
He's grieved.
he's grieved.
And so what does he return to?
So there's two returns here, which seem to be lining up with these two returns in the verse before. I see that. At one level, return actually means to basically be retreat from any kind of conflict or any kind of warfare. So at one level, I think he's talking about he keeps on losing all these fights and these wars. So all he's doing is in a process of retreating. But I haven't been able to crack this return and line it up, because I think somehow we're going to be lining it up with these two returns here, but I've not been able to do that. That's that bit.
Short question, this intelligence,
Yes.
do you say that this is the same like in verse 30, and have intelligence with them that forsake the Holy Covenant?
Yeah, so that's why I picked up that word intelligence. That's what I'm saying is happening here.
Okay.
So the last part of the verse, it says, and have indignation against the Holy Covenant. So this indignation against the Holy Covenant is when he now begins to put in law that Romanism is going to be the state religion. This is his indignation that he's having against the Holy Covenant. That's how I understand that part of the verse. That when he starts having this intelligence with them, he's going to put into the statute books that this nation now is against our understanding of what the Holy Covenant is all about. So shall he do. He shall even return. I'm not sure what that return is there. And have intelligence with them that forsake the Holy Covenant. So this intelligence is in 533. He's going to write this letter of approval to, I think he's the second, to Pope John in 533, when he just comes to the bishopric, where he's taken over now, and he's going to write him a letter, and in the process of doing that, he's going to establish by law that Romanism is the state religion. And I think part of all of this war that he's going to make with the Vandals, is actually on the pretext of this attack that the Vandals are making against Catholics. So one of the arguments that he actually explains to everybody, the reason he's going to go and make war with the Vandals is because of this warfare between the Catholics and the Arians. Brother Michael.
Verse 30, the way that I'm understanding it says that he shall have indignation against the Holy Covenant, and then that colon is saying, let me explain what I mean by his indignation against the Holy Covenant. He's going to have intelligence with them that forsake the covenant. So the return is the same return.
Yeah,
It's saying, therefore he shall be grieved and return once and have indignation against the Holy Covenant. Let me explain what I mean by his returning and having indignation. He shall do this, even this, what I just said, have intelligence with them that forsake the Holy Covenant.
So you're saying the indignation and the intelligence are the same thing?
Yeah. Him having intelligence with them that forsake the
Is the
covenant is him
indignation.
having indignation against
I
the
can see
covenant.
that.
Yeah.
And so the return is just one return. He retreats, or however you understand return, but it's not returning twice. It's that so shall he even return, referring back to the time he returned. It's just saying, explaining it in another way. Yeah. I don't know if that's right. That's how I'm
Okay.
I'm not pushing it.
So at least we've covered the... Oh, sorry, Sister Alison.
I just want to know the he that we're talking about. This is Constantine who's doing all of this?
Justinian.
Oh, Justinian.
Yeah. Constantine's back here, and 200 years later we're into the time period of Justinian. So I've covered the history of this, and maybe we need to understand a bit more about what this verse is teaching us. And we've got to 533, and then the next verse, just in closing, the next verse is going to take us to 538, which we've already discussed. This is verse 31. And verse 31, I've got verse 31 beginning from 330 AD to 508, to 5:38. I've got 31, 31, and 31. So verse 31 takes you right back to this history and then carries on again. So there's another repeat and enlarge in verse 31. Verse 31 is taking you right back to here and brings you back again. Let's close with prayer. Sorry we're a bit late. Heavenly Father, we thank you for your loving kindness and your goodness towards us. We ask and pray that you would be with us and bless us, that we may honour you and glorify your name. Lord, we recognise that we don't understand this verse clearly. We understand that it's an important verse, for surely, Lord, it has an application at the end of the world that we must understand. Father, we ask and pray that you would open our understanding of these words so that we might be able to not only understand history, but prophetic history and its fulfillment at the end of the world. Be with us and bless us, we ask and pray in the name of Jesus. Amen.